Ronan Langan is the clinical lead of the DCU Exoskeleton Programme since 2019. He is a neuro physiotherapist who worked as a senior physiotherapist in the National Rehabilitation Hospital. Ronan is a current PhD candidate researching the effects of the exoskeleton walking on for those who walk regularly and often. Ronan is joined on stage by his assistant Grainne and a man who you all know as Jack Kavanagh, who sustained a life-changing spinal cord injury in 2012, leaving him with 15% muscle function. In the years since, Jack has challenged the perceptions and limitations of his situation. Jack is a pharmacist, speaker and non-executive director. At present, he runs Move the Needle, a consultancy taking on select projects, and sits on the board of directors of the National Disability Authority, as well as a leadership development organisation, Common Purpose Ireland. He is engaged with the World Health Organization in relation to digital and assistive technology and is currently focused on tackling accessibility in aviation. So I will hand you over to Ronan Langan. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Jack. You're very good. Thanks everyone for the welcome. Jack, the other Jack Kavanagh, will be joining in a few minutes, but we have to have the reveal of the exoskeleton, so we're going for a little bit of pizzazz. Thanks a million to Spinal Injuries Ireland for asking me to speak and to share my knowledge about this pretty amazing technology with you all. I hope you get a good understanding from what we're going to cover today. I understand that there's people in the room that probably know a fair bit about exoskeletons, but I appreciate there's probably quite a few that don't know much at all. So really, we're going to cover the information for those people who don't know an awful lot. I guess where to start? I think it was really interesting to hear the talks this morning, that described the process of bringing new therapeutics and new therapies to clinical trial, and that 16-year kind of journey for something to come from conception into availability. But even at that point, that journey doesn't stop for therapies, because there's always changing theories in the fields of rehabilitation or medicine. So even when exoskeletons have walked that journey now, they have CE marking, FDA approval, and then the Health Products Regulatory Authority in Ireland have also approved them for use with spinal injury. But even at that point, there remains a challenge and the journey goes on. And that challenge is about integrating those devices into practice and into the general management of your spinal injury or your paralysis, or however you want to describe it. Like I said, we'll cover the basics. And we might as well start. So this technology has been around and approved for in or around 10 to 15 years, and available in Ireland for quite a large amount of that time. We were good uptakers in the early kind of usage of exoskeletons. So we're starting to know a little bit about what they can do. So like we say, we see them more and more in neuro rehab all around the world. There is quite a number of options available. So we're going to talk in a little bit more detail when we see the suit about the specifics and the kind of requirements for the device you'll see today. But you have to bear in mind, there may be other devices out there that might suit your needs more or less. There's dozens of manufacturers of these robotic exoskeletons now. Very often, we probably suspect that it complements your conventional therapy and physio management or therapeutic management as much as maybe replaces it. We heard a lot of talk this morning around future cures, and that stuff was really exciting for me as a clinician who's worked in this space for such a long time. So I suppose it's good to kind of say that this isn't the kind of technology that's going to have a major impact on healing your spinal cord, affecting your neurons, or impacting or improving the way some of the therapeutics that are being explored at the moment might do. But it'll certainly complement those when they come on stream. It complements conventional therapy, but in some instances, walking in a robot may be superior to things you do. The most obvious example I can think of is, and something that's recommended for all people with a spinal cord injury, is a standing guideline or a standing recommendation. So everyone is prescribed an easy stand or a standing frame or a tilt table, and everyone has to do, and there's, going to the confessional when you go to your annual checkup and say, are you standing, because it is really good for your body. But walking and standing is always going to be superior, isn't it? but a standing frame is a hell of a lot cheaper than a robot. So the exoskeleton devices are coming in at around €200,000. So it's not really realistic for people to be able to access them in their home, but I say yet, because these things will improve. So in terms of what we know, because like I say, they've been around for quite a while, right? So what do we know about exoskeletons and how can they maybe potentially benefit a spinal cord injury? The most important thing I feel that is to say is that everyone here is very unique and very different. Everyone is in a different stage of their journey. And so what an exoskeleton device might mean or be able to offer you could be different to what it is for everyone else. So we can talk about some general stuff, but it's always going to differ from person to person. So things we do know from the medical literature, and we can never say this definitively, but there's pretty good evidence to support that if you're using it to rehab your walking, it will probably be beneficial for that, but much more likely in the early stages. Now, we've probably seen a little bit of impact in the later stages as well in terms of what we do, but the evidence would support the best applications in the early stages. Bladder and bowel function, those being very gravity-dependent activities, the same reason that you're prescribed a standing frame, walking and moving while standing is going to be very helpful for supporting your movements in that way. Spasticity, so people with very high tone. So it is, if your tone is really high, you might not actually be able to use an exoskeleton, but it may also reduce your spasticity for people with kind of moderate and the lighter end of the severe spectrum. But it doesn't tend to last. It'll help it for a while. You might get relief for a day or two after a walk, but it won't persist beyond that. And over time, it won't change the spasticity. There's a little bit of research coming out around now nerve pain, and there's some interesting studies. And this is a big one for people, right? Because actually, if you're having a lot of neuropathic pain, all the other problems that come with a spinal injury can be really challenging, but pain can often be amongst the worst, right? So there's a little bit of evidence to suggest that walking might be beneficial for nerve pain. And then quality of life, and most studies and most pieces of research will always add in some measure of a person's quality of life, and we tend to see improvements in this area for people that engage in robotic walking. But like I said, the applications are going to be different depending on where you're at in your journey. So when I say acute, subacute, or chronic stages, think about to really, really generalize it, think about that as like the matter is acute, the NRH is the subacute, and then chronic is when you go home and engage with community services or tertiary services. In the acute stages, it may be really beneficial in getting you up and moving and walking really quickly, versus in the chronic stages, it may be much more about managing the secondary complications of your condition, of your spinal injury, all the things that kind of affect your day or maybe impact your day, like spasticity or irregular bowel, and it might have more impact at that point, And then also, if you're a complete or an incomplete injury, so obviously if you don't walk or you're a full-time wheelchair user, the experience of walking may be beneficial in different ways to someone who is working on an ongoing rehab of their walking. And plenty of people can continue to rehab their walking, well after they're discharged or well after that initial year. There's no more neurological recovery happening, but you are still training, and that can be really beneficial in training your body in different ways, and it's a really different way to train and exercise your body. When we look at all this research evidence and a patient comes in front of us, we have to use that evidence to make our decision about the person that we're seeing in front of us. So we try to apply it. Any clinician working with a robot like this will be able to try to apply it to maybe see how might this work best for you and what can we maybe tackle in terms of the problems that you're describing to us. So on top of what we kind of know from the research and maybe some of our experiential learning or what we've learned from using this technology on a daily basis, and what we're really interested in DCU is people that walk regularly. So we have some people who come in for short bursts, and then we have some people that come in once a week and have done for really quite a long time. So we're trying to get a really diverse view of what the technology can do. For those people that walk often and over long periods of time, up into 40, 50, 60 sessions, walking can be a very transformative experience for them. So what I mean by that is that it kind of changes their relationship with their body, it changes their perception of themselves, and they feel a renewed sense of connectedness to their legs. I have to be really at pains to say we haven't necessarily changed their spinal injury or improved their spinal cord lesion, but Sitting in a chair, there's not a lot of sensory information from the legs, but standing and walking, there's a little bit more. So we don't understand maybe the mechanisms that might be sort of underpinning that, but that's what we're going to go do and spend some time working on. This, what I'm describing, is what patients are telling us when we go for really in-depth interviews using that kind of style of research and methodology. For some that we've seen, and this is anecdotal is what I'm reporting here, this is some of the instances of things that people have said to me, pain is reduced and people have been able to reduce their pain meds, but not everyone. Some people have improved their walking, and maybe we have a couple of people who would say now maybe leave their wheelchair at the door when they come into the house and walk around the house, compared to when they were maybe a full-time wheelchair user. They would have been an incomplete injury, and it just helped to support and improve their walking. And lots of people report reduced spasticity for a day or two. It comes back, but they still value it. I think that's what's really important, that they still value that reduction in their spasticity. And plenty of people will be reporting bowel regularity as well. So what do we want to learn? So like I said, we're interested in the long-term users, and then we're interested in the impact on the brain and the nerves, right? So what I mean by this is if people are describing a renewed sense of connectedness to their legs, we have to try and figure out, as a research institute, how can we measure that, and can we say that that's actually happening and for definite? So what that is reading brain signals and reading nerve signals using specialist technology to see if we're altering the transmission of signals from the brain to the spinal cord in any way. So that's what we're spending a little bit of time designing and developing now, and that'll be really interesting. And when the kind of devices that we learned about in the first half of today, like brain-machine interface and spinal cord stimulation, come on stream, people that are primed like this through lots of walks may, and again, we don't know it, may have a better opportunity and a better ability to access the changes that those devices may drive in them. So a lot of hope, not a lot of certainty, but, that's what we're kind of trying to walk that tightrope. There is a strong belief for us in the programme that people who are full-time wheelchair users, not specifically, will benefit. Nearly always, everyone will benefit in some way from regular access to walking. Of course, we don't have capacity to say do it for everyone in this room, but we're trying to bring it to as many people as possible and drive and support a little bit of change in practice nationally and say maybe this is something we need to consider more as a regular access for people who are full-time wheelchair users. We also have moved into paediatrics. It's probably not relevant for today because we don't have a lot of kids with spinal cord injury in this country, but we have now got robotic solutions for kids as well. So people might be thinking, where can I access one? So we don't, like I said, we don't see a lot of integration into physio practice or neurology practice, if you like, but there are a couple of places. So in DCU, we're doing research-based access. So people would need to qualify for clinical trials. But there are two places in the country where you can access robotic walking on a pay-to-walk basis. One is the No Barriers Foundation in Letterkenny in Donegal. So if you live in that direction, you can celebrate that. And then there's the Elite Gym in Cork. And again, through the networks, we can give people more detail on that if they need them. But there are places, I suppose, is the point. The last thing I want to say before we meet Jack in the robot is that we are going to be recruiting very soon for a clinical trial. We'll probably be hopefully sending out emails through the networks of Spinal Injuries Ireland in January. And we'll be recruiting incomplete spinal cord injuries for a trial of muscle function using those sensors that can detect muscle activation. So that would be people who are in Asia C or a D, and we'll be looking for 10 participants at that stage. We may also be looking for 10 control participants as well. Like Dr. Smith described earlier, good clinical trials require controls so that we know that what we're doing is having an impact. And of course, the people that would apply would not have been able to maybe use an exoskeleton previously, but we may, so long as it's not been within the last year, we might be happy with that. So I guess at this stage, this is where I hope Jack is standing on the other side of the door in an exoskeleton. I'd like to introduce you guys to Jack. And my colleague Matthew is actually walking Jack in the device today. And we're going to come into the room and walk up so people can get a bit of a closer look. And we're going to have a little bit of a chat to Jack about what it means to him. And we'll have a little bit of a chat about how it works and what it does and that kind of stuff as well. But here he comes right on cue. Thanks, Jack. Woo! I'm going to sneak down off stage here, Jack, to come and meet you guys. What are your initial thoughts? Or that you'd like to share, Jack?
What are my initial thoughts?
Yeah.
It's a lot more daunting walking into a full room than walking in a room and slagging you.
Fair. So I suppose you've done, we really should have checked, definitely upwards of 50 or 60 sessions of exoskeleton walking, I suspect.
Easily, yeah.
What does it mean to you?
Well, look, in the early stages, the first time you get up and walk, there is the very big emotional and psychological thrill of it. I'd say the initial piece is more emotional than anything. My dad was there the first time I stood up. We might just stop here and pivot. So yeah, my dad was there the first time that I stood. And
Keep going.
We'll take a left step. Pivot. And, you know, standing up and being eye to eye with him was a really significant thing for me, and being able to give someone a hug at eye level, and that moment happened for the rest of my family at different stages.
Yeah.
And so that was the emotional part of it, I'd say. And then there is the piece of seeing yourself in a mirror walking towards yourself, and that becomes very psychologically motivating, I think. And after the initial emotional piece wears off, I do think it becomes more of a challenge. And, you know, there's a little bit of setup the first time you do it, or the first couple of times you do it. And once you start to get the setup nailed down and you get used to practicing your steps, then it becomes more of a challenge. And you're trying to improve the pattern of your walking, you're trying to improve your relationship with your handler, Matt in this case, and you're trying to increase your step count. And so they're all the initial stages, but I suppose the bigger piece is that over time I've noticed significant impacts. You know, I think, and you'll know this from chatting to others in the focus groups, that when you do something like walking for your health and you start to see the benefits, the secondary benefits, you become more inclined to adopt other health-seeking behaviours. And that's been huge for me. Like my nerve pain has reduced after I walk. I definitely feel a lot more connected to my body on my left step. I feel a lot more connected to my body is the best way of describing it. My spasticity reduces. So, like, all of that becomes very intrinsically motivating then to keep wanting to go back for more, I suppose.
I think, Jack, you're really demonstrating what what we describe as the learning curve. You know, what's that expression? You can walk and chew gum at the same time. The fact that Jack can walk up and down in front of you all and have a chat about it shows he's reached like an expert level of use with the device. That doesn't come instantly, you know. And does deserve a round of applause. Very, very often for people learning to use the technology initially, it's not that enjoyable because you kind of have this expectation about how amazing it'll be to get up and walk for the first time in X number of years. But it's actually really hard to learn to use one. And people can get a little bit disillusioned. So it's really good for people to know that the real joy comes with like expertise in the walking and the fluidity and that, like you said, that relationship with your handler. And the handler is a really key element here. These devices can't self-balance yet. The technology still is in its relatively early stages, you know. So Matt has to be there to spot Jack. You can see he's not working very hard, which is the norm for him, of course. But
if Matt had a mic, I'd say the roles might be reversed.
But you can see how that's because Jack's really good at using the device now, right? But earlier on, the handler has to do a little bit more as the person's learning to perfect using the device. So that's a real challenge. In terms of just to describe, just really quickly, Jack, and this is kind of the boring stuff, but we just have to cover it. There are height and weight limitations, so around 5 foot, up to around 6'3". But like it is actually more dependent on the length of your legs, your thigh length and your shin length. There's a weight limit of around 100 kilos, and then there are certain things that will prohibit you from using one if your bone density is too low, so a really good reason to keep your standing programs up. If your spasticity is too high, a really good reason to continue to manage your spasticity through all the mechanisms we know. Standing programs, medications if needed, regular stretching, all the things these things might limit your access. Ultimately, your body and your skeleton has to be able to be moved through a stepping pattern for this device to be usable for you. So it's really important to maintain all those, to maintain your body health, right? But it's complementary because it's a really good way to continue maintaining your body health, right?
Yeah, well, I talked about that intrinsic motivation piece. Like, for me, certainly what I have noticed over the years is post leaving rehab, I think people come to visit and everybody brings cake, and and I put on a reasonable amount of weight, and my body type is I'm generally fairly lean and slim, but everybody brings cake, and I put on weight over a couple of years post injury, and a certain day I looked in the mirror and I said, this trajectory leads me to not great outcomes down the line. And so you start to bring in some basic health habits. You're drinking more water, you're leaving the dessert behind you instead of going for seconds, and regular movement and exercise, more focus on sleep. And then you start to bring in the movement elements. And we forget that very quickly after starting to use a wheelchair that our bodies need to move, we need to be upright. And so whilst I walk once a week usually, I stand every morning, and that keeps the bone density stable, and allows me to continue to do the other health-seeking behaviours. And I think that's really important, is that this is complementary. It is also body maintenance. We heard about the research that's ongoing earlier, and if you want to be able to avail of that, you do things now for yourself in the future. So that your body is in a good shape to be able to avail of those types of treatments.
Can I ask, how would you compare standing statically to walking in a robot for you?
Fairly boring. There's not walking through space. You get all the stretching and all the other elements that come with that. So my body feels a lot looser after the walking.
Does anyone know how much time we have left? I'd love to know. We do a little walk up the aisle just in case anyone further down wants to have a little. Can you guys nail that? And then just to say, I commented that this can be beneficial for people with incomplete spinal cord injury who are maybe rehabbing their walking. So the reason for that is the robot has a huge amount of kind of dynamic support it can offer, right? So Jack has an Asia A injury, so he needs full robotic assistance. The robot has what's called an adaptive control mode, so it can detect if you're working in it, and it checks about 300 times every step if you're applying any force through the step. And if it detects it, it pulls back in real time. So it allows you to work and use the movement that you have while you're walking the device, which is the ideal way of retraining and working that movement. So we can support someone and potentially benefit someone who's working on their walking who maybe walks full-time and maybe only uses a stick, but they need help with their patterning, to someone who's maybe just getting on their feet or only able to stand, right through to someone who can't, who's a full-time wheelchair user. So the versatility of this device in particular is particularly good. Not all devices offer that versatility. So you always have to critique the device, through the lens of what's going to work best for me. And thankfully in Ireland, we don't have that many that are commercially available here. It requires medical distributors. There's the whole infrastructure needed, engineering support to keep them going. We are in the infancy of this technology, despite it having that same journey that we're talking about for the other therapeutics. I have 5 minutes left. Amazing, thank you. So, there's still a journey after the technology or the innovation arrives. There's still improvement, there's still development, and there's still growing understanding of how it might impact your community as people with spinal cord injury. Jack, I'll stop talking for a moment now. Have you anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, personally, I see this as body maintenance and training. But I also see this as preventative healthcare. We know the secondary complications. We might just take one step and turn to the audience. We know that,
Brilliant.
you know, the secondary complications can kick in within a short enough period of time with spinal cord injury. And so anything that you can do to keep your body mobile and active, to keep the blood flowing, to keep your organs all functioning in a traditional pattern is going to be good for you. And like when I get up to walk, or I stand in the morning, or I get out on the bike or go to the gym, or all these things are things that you do for yourself to feel good on the day. But they're things that I do for Jack in 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, 40 years, you know. And so I very much see tools like the exoskeleton, but anything that you can do to move your body, it's good for your head and emotional well-being as well, but they're things that you do for your body today and in the future. And so very much it's preventative in terms of secondary complications, you know, pressure sores, all these kind of things are risk factors for anyone that's sitting a lot. And so the more that you can do to be up and active in different ways, whether that's sport or using training tools like this, certainly I would hugely be encouraging that.
So in DCU, we do in or around, we've fallen shy for the last 2 years, but in or around 1 million steps per year. So it's about 970, 980,000, which is a little bit frustrating, but anyway. So we're learning a lot about the effects and the impacts. There has been a handful of people who it hasn't really offered a tremendous amount of benefit for, but very small numbers. By and large, in around the 200 people that have come through our program or our service, the benefits and the feelings around the technology and what it's offered them has been overwhelmingly positive. But of course, it may not suit everyone, but for the most part, people benefit, enjoy the experience of the walking, and like I say, benefit in a whole host of different ways.
Could I pick up on something that you mentioned earlier, which is it's that initial adoption phase can be quite frustrating, and there can be a little bit of trial and error the first couple of times that you come. Like, I'm quite tall and slim. You'll notice I'm wearing a jacket and potentially about to pass out. But the reason for that is I am quite tall and slim, and so I need a bit of padding myself to fill out the suit so that I'm not moving within it. And these were all things that we learned as we went. And so for anybody that does try standing or walking as a tool, stick with it through those first couple of sessions until you get sort of that first level of feeling competent in the suit, because those first few sessions can be frustrating as you go through the trial and error of getting set up.
I know we have to finish up, and the stage manager's probably going to kill me. So we might start heading. We head for the door. Door. Jack, I want to say one thing. Jack said about passing out there, and a lot of people thought, God, if I went up that straight, I'd probably pass out, right? Because Jack's a C6.5, spinal cord injury,
5.5.
or 5.5, and his blood pressure is seriously at risk of dropping. But because he's moving, he can maintain it much better. So people who struggle in that sense often perform much better. We just can't dilly-dally standing around. But Jack's doing brilliant.